Welcome back to Worship Musician Training. This is the final video in the series. This video is all about music stands. Um, there's a lot to talk about, a lot to think about with music stands, but first I want to consider what music stands are useful for. Do you need something to be held on stage? Then put it on a music stand. And that's kind of it. Do you need music? Do you need to read music from you? Then use a music stand. It's pretty simple. It's a utility item, and any purpose that you can think of that you really, really need that utility item for is a reason to have it. So when we're thinking about using music stands and the purpose that they're intended for holding music for us to read from, when we're thinking of them in that context, we have to realize that sometimes we need music stands because we're just learning all of this music theory stuff. I've gone through in this series and talked about scales and chords and numbers and solfege, number system and solfege, and learning songs and learning rolls and all of this stuff, and rhythm, not to mention rhythm. That's a lot of stuff to learn. And if you're trying to learn all of it all at once, I hope you don't. I hope you take it really methodically and slowly, step by step. But if you're trying to learn all that stuff at once, it's going to go pretty slow. So your rate at which you grow in acquiring all of this knowledge is going to be slow. This also just depends on how much time you have to practice, how much time you have to dedicate to mentally to dedicate to thinking about music and thinking about your participation in the worship team. There's lots of reasons why our growth can be limited. And I guess that's all I'll say about it, is that, yeah, sometimes we grow slower than the others around us, and that's okay. The music stand helps us in that way because it fills in the gaps in our knowledge. Because that's all that we really have the music there for. Right. So there are reasons to avoid music stands in this case, though, and that is if the music stand is leading you to become lazy. And there's no excuse for this. There's no excuse for laziness. You should always have an attitude of growth, of advancement in some way, and if that means that you're on the worship team but you can't grow in the worship team, that's totally fine. If you're growing in some other area of your life, well, then that's not laziness. That's just a limitation. That's okay. That's totally fine. But if you have 10 hours a week to dedicate to practicing and you don't, and you just show up on Sunday and use a music stand, then that's laziness, and you should probably check that out. It's not the right attitude for worship. And yeah, I don't think there's anything else I need to say about it, right? There's no excuse for laziness. There are other reasons why people like to argue for not having music stands, like it hinders the worship experience, or it disconnects the band from the congregation, or it looks ugly. Those can all be true, but I don't really think that those are really good reasons for getting rid of music stands, because the reality is that worship volunteers, they're volunteering their time to put together a worship service every Sunday. They probably don't have the time to dedicate to getting all of this knowledge, at least right away. Over time, over a long period of time, and I'm talking years again, over the years of progressively, slowly building your skills, slowly building your knowledge, throughout that whole time, you realize that you rely less and less on the music stand because the knowledge is coming and the knowledge is growing. And no matter how fast or how slow that knowledge is growing, how fast or how slow you're growing, if you are growing, then that's a good thing. If you are not growing, if you are stagnating, and you are doing so defiantly, then that's a problem. So there's why music stand is good and why you should use them. So, and a couple of reasons why you might not want to use them as well. So what if you have reached that level of growth to where you no longer need a music stand? Well, then I've drawn this red line to separate these bottom 2 points, because this is the point where you reach that level. And there's a few things to realize when you do reach that level. Is you've got the knowledge of the scales, you've got the knowledge of the chords, the theory, you've got the knowledge of the songs, you've got the knowledge of the role that you're playing with your instrument. What next? Do I try and memorize the parts from the album, or the YouTube video, the live recording that this version comes from? No, I don't think so. Because the whole point of getting to this level of knowledge is that you get the opportunity to improvise, to play improvisationally, entirely improvisationally, and that's the cool thing about having this growth, this level of growth that you reach over years of time and dedication and practice. You reach that level, and then suddenly you have freedom. You have freedom to play whatever you want to. As long as you're playing within your role, you're staying within your instrument's role. That's a limitation. That's a good thing to have that limitation, because that means the band sounds better. If you have a whole band of musicians and they all know their stuff, they're all well-seasoned musicians, cool. But if they're playing over each other, if they're stepping on each other's toes, they're not staying in the right role, it's not going to sound like a very good band, no matter how good the individual musicians are. So that's a limitation, staying in your role. That's a good thing. Another good limitation is the theory itself, the scales and the chords. Worship music, we really don't often go outside of the key signature that we're playing in. You're going to be limited, is what I'm saying. You're going to be limited by a specific tonality that is laid out in the scale and it's laid out in the chords. Stick within that scale. Stick within that framework of those chords, of that chord progression, and it's all going to be good. You don't have to worry about throwing in a crazy harmony or anything like that, because everything that everybody else is going to be playing is going to be within that harmonic framework of most likely the major scale and a 1, 4, 5, 6 chord progression. Another cool thing that happens at this level of growth is well, you have all those benefits of, a cleaner stage, a better connection between the band and the congregation, all that stuff. But you also have, and maybe a better worship experience. That's a little bit more subjective. But you also have this personal growth. That's the whole point, right? But you have this personal experience of worship. And that experience of worship is the process of growing. It's the process of acquiring knowledge, of bettering yourself as a musician, and selflessly using those talents and gifts and the time and everything that you've dedicated over the years of practicing. You could finally get to just dedicate it every single week and Sunday. And that's really what we're doing here in worship music. Okay, so there's music stands. There are reasons to have them. There are reasons to not have them. But when you don't have them, when you don't need them anymore, it's a really cool thing. When your band, when your team as a unit is solid, you're playing within the limitations that are there for a reason, you have a really, really good sound. And hopefully this series has been helpful to you as you work towards that goal. And that goal this entire time has been the goal of worship, has been the goal of growth through music.